What is it about society that disappoints you so much?
Oh, I don't know. Is it that we collectively thought Steve Jobs was a great man, even when we knew he made billions off the backs of children? Or maybe it's that it feels like all our heroes are counterfeit. The world itself's just one big hoax. Spamming each other with our burning commentary bullshit masquerading as insight. Our social media faking as intimacy. Or is it that we voted for this? Not with our rigged elections, but with our things, our property, our money. I'm not saying anything new. We all know why we do this, not because Hunger Games books makes us happy, but because we want to be sedated. Because it's painful not to pretend. Because we're cowards. Fuck society.
Elliot, you're not saying anything. What's wrong?
Nothing.
Happy heresies and welcome to the desert of the real. You just heard a clip from one of my favorite shows, Mr. Robot. A truly Matrix / V for Vendetta / Fight Club kind of visual expression. And you have just manifested an Aeon Byte Gnostic radio to find out you are a Mr. Robot. A spiritual anarchist attempting to hack this counterfeit reality. You are Neo, you are Truman, you are Curtis from Snowpiercer, just as you are Emmett from the Lego Movie. You sense this now, and there is no turning back as you wage intellectual and mystic war against Jehovah and his angelic IT department.
We're the middle children of history, man. No purpose or place. We have no Great War, no Great Depression. Our Great War is a spiritual war. Our Great Depression is our lives.
It's a hard war, and I've been experiencing it recently. As some of you may know, my daughter Ellie was born late August, suffered a severe intestinal infection that required heavy surgery, and has been in the hospital now for about 4 weeks. I'm writing and editing this episode from her very room at Laurie's Children's Hospital, downtown by the Magnificent Mile. Maybe still here once the show airs. It's been a trying time in a year when the Archons have thrown everything at me in an attempt to psychically sodomize me into sleep and ignorance. But the heresy must go on, and here I am with you in this veil of tears, in this world of generations, waking up one more time. And Ellie is with us as I write this.
And what is any life if not the pursuit of a dream?
What if the dream became a nightmare?
Welcome to Ellie's room. That dream of you, oh you veterans of 1,000 psychic wars, you modern-day Tom Sawyers, your mind not for rent by any god or government. Welcome you Mr. Robots. I am Abraxas, that terrible god above God as the ancients knew him. The alien god of Jung and Basilides and Hermann Hesse. That unfinished god like Baphomet, we are all working together to make manifest and complete before this world falls into irrelevance and hopeless boredom. And you are Abraxas too. I incarnate as Miguel Connor, or Ellie's father, broadcasting at the lawful but frigid dystopia of Chicago. We're writing our own gospel and living our own myth. That will never change.
By the power of truth, I, while living, have conquered the universe.
We need to be free men and women. If we're not free, then we're no different than Cylons.
On this October, the year of our Demiurge 2015, our topic will be Vegetarianism and Gnosticism. I myself became a vegetarian, although not a vegan, about a year ago, for no conscious reason. There were some small visions, some epiphanies, some unconscious forces that came from the gutters of my ego, and then some decisions. I still don't know why it happened, other than to lessen my footprint of suffering upon Gaia's bloated carcass. That's where I am.
The cosmic ballet goes on.
Does anyone want to switch seats?
Mercifully, I won't be discussing vegetarianism and Gnosticism. On this episode, it will be our astral guest, the wise and august and funny James Bean. James is a comparative religion scholar and book reviewer, author, public speaker, broadcaster with a broad familiarity with global religions and spiritual traditions. He has been involved with public radio, Radio for Peace International, the community radio movement, Wisdom Radio, for a decade or so on Sirius satellite radio. He's also an independent producer currently creating programs for several stations. James is also a scholar and practitioner of Surat Sabda Yoga, an ancient form of meditation from India. For more information on James, please visit spiritualawakeningradio.com. And get ready to get into a meaty discussion on vegetarianism, not just with the Gnostics, but other esoteric and even orthodox movements of antiquity.
Praise the Lord and pass the ammunition.
Please support Aeon Byte in any way you can. Your patronage keeps this Red Pill cafeteria open. September wasn't exactly an Earth, Wind, and Fire song when it came to support. One of the worst months in years, actually, even if traffic continues to grow. Very strange, but I need your sponsorship to keep on trucking me. Don't forget that I am an Amazon.com affiliate, so any books you order from thegodabovegod.com grant me a kickback. In fact, if you order anything, whether it's clothes, appliances, or vegan sex toys, click through the site first, and I will get a kickback from that as well, even if you don't order anything advertised on the site. We're going to build vast futures of light here at the virtual Alexandria, do so many wonders together. I just know it. I just know it. At least understand the great mystery of why Chewbacca didn't get a medal at the end of episode 4, and the truth that Greedo never shot first. Much appreciation to you Mr. Robots who support this no-kill zone of life on a weekly basis.
Before this battle is over, the world will know that few stood against many.
We end with some of the words from Mark Twain. I feel this quote, if you really listen to it, is one of the most beautiful and inspirational quotations in all of history. At least the history of awakening that so few of us experience. I always felt that Twain wasn't so much an agnostic but a true Gnostic, and my gut tells me some evidence will come out on this. In any event, for Ellie and her struggles with the God of the Old Testament, who is more like the God of the Old Testicle, I will narrate it.
I am the architect. I created the Matrix. I've been waiting for you.
It's from The Mysterious Stranger, and many of you have seen a clip on YouTube with Satan playing the demiurge against Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn. Is the Mysterious Stranger Satan? Or is he a version of you as you travel the desert of the real? Who knows? But here it is. You are not you. You have no body, no blood, no bones. You are but a thought. I myself have no existence. I am but a dream, your dream, a creature of your imagination. In a moment you will have realized this. Then you will banish me from your visions, and I shall dissolve into the nothingness out of which you made me. In a little while, You will be alone in a shoreless space, to wander its limitless solitudes without friend or comrade forever. You will remain a thought, the only existent thought, and by your nature inextinguishable, indestructible. But I, your poor servant, have revealed you to yourself and set you free. Dream other dreams, and better.
Don't you see? It's not about you. It's about them.
But I can't go back.
Don't know that you got a choice, son. No man can walk out on his own story.
Strange that you should have suspected years ago, centuries, ages, aeons ago. For you have existed, companionless, through all eternities. Strange, indeed, that you should not have suspected that your universe and its contents were only dreams, visions, fiction. Strange, because they are so frankly and hysterically insane. Like all dreams, a God who could make good children as easily as bad, yet preferred to make bad ones, who could have made every one of them happy, yet never made a single happy one, who made them prize their bitter life, yet stingingly cut it short, who gave his angels eternal happiness unearned, yet required his other children to earn it, who gave his angels painless lives, yet cursed his other children with biting miseries and maladies of mind and body, who mouths justice and invented hell, mouths mercy and invented hell, mouths golden rules and forgiveness multiplied by 70 times 7 and invented hell, who mouths morals to other people and has none himself, who frowns upon crimes yet commits them all, who created man without invitation, then tries to shuffle the responsibility for man's acts upon man, instead of honorably placing it where it belongs, upon himself. And finally, with altogether divine obtuseness, invites a poor, abused slave to worship him.
Maybe he's anti-God, bringing darkness instead of light.
You perceive now that these things are all impossible except in a dream. You perceive that they are pure and puerile insanities, the silly creations of an imagination that is not conscious of its freaks. In a word, they are a dream, and you are the maker of it. The dream marks are all present. You should have recognized them earlier. It is true that which I have revealed to you. There is no God, no universe, no human race, no earthly life, no heaven, no hell. It is all a dream, a grotesque and foolish dream. Nothing exists but you, and you are but a thought, a vagrant thought, a useless thought, a homeless thought, wandering forlorn among the empty eternities. Welcome to Ellie's room.
I fought the good fight. I finished the race. I kept the faith.
This is the AM Bite interview, and with us we definitely have the pleasure of being joined by James Bean. How you doing today, James?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me as a guest on your show. I'm a definite fan of AM Bite Gnostic Radio.
Oh, well, thank you very much for being on. So why don't, before we get to the meat of matters, and pardon the pun, why don't we get started with you and your spiritual hitchhiking and how you got to where you are now?
Well, how I became the heretic I am today. In my teens, I became very drawn to the subject of religion, God, spirituality, prayer, what I now would call meditation, although I didn't use that word at first back then. And so I began my journey in the Protestant world. You might even use the word fundagelical, to use your term. But one day I was reading, using a fairly candid, honest, and scholarly translation called the Berkeley Bible. I was reading the book of Jude in the New Testament, where Jude actually quotes from the book of 1 Enoch, chapter 1, according to the footnote. And I was most intrigued. It's sort of like acid in the Kool-Aid, or kind of a gateway to a whole new world opening up there. I was fascinated that Jude knew of and had apparently on his bookshelf, or in his collection of scrolls, a book called 1 Enoch, and it's not in the Old Testament, it's not in the table of contents, shall we say. So I became very intrigued by the idea that there are scriptures floating around that are not included in the Bible, and if it's okay with Jude, then we should just all run out and boycott.
Very true. Oh yeah, it's there.
It's sort of a Pandora's box, you know. You start out reading Enoch, and before you know it, you're reading the Upanishads or something. You know, it's a gateway scripture, if you will. And so, not long after I noticed that footnote and quote by Jude, I found someone that sold translations of the books of 1st and 2nd Enoch, and thus began my collecting of these kinds of writings. I became very intrigued with the whole question of who wrote the Bible. Did it drop from the sky and was caught by some early church fathers? Did it drop again in 1611 and was caught by a guy by the name of King James? Or is it a bit more complicated than that? And, of course, it is. It's very complicated question, and all of these other writings were very prominent in the ancient world, used by different people. I started collecting Dead Sea Scrolls, Apocrypha, pseudepigraphical writings, the Book of Noah, which is mentioned in Enoch, and eventually at the University of Maine bookstore, it was probably in 1977, it was a newly arrived book, the first edition of the Nag Hammadi Library in English by James M. Robinson. And so that was amazing. I was very drawn to the Gnostic texts. But back then, you had nobody to talk to. No commentary had really come out. All of that work was yet to be published back then. So it's just you, the Nag Hammadi, and lacuna, or gaps in the text, and strange, weird names you've never encountered before, you know, from a whole other world, practically. But I was very drawn to the spirituality in the Gnostic Gospels. And, of course, that book came out of the Gnostic Gospels by Elaine Pagels, which was extremely helpful. So I was very drawn to Gnostic wisdom and also those contemplative medieval mystics of Europe, and eventually wanted to, when I had taken things as far as I could on my own, I started to look for a living path. Instead of thinking of it as an archaeological dig of all these dead guys, I wanted to find a living form of Christian mysticism, or the Church of Meister Eckhart at the corner of Main and Union. Just something now, you know, something with us now. And but that was very difficult. The hippie Christians, the Jesus people, their whole thing was not trusting people over 30, but oddly enough, in the area of religion, they did. They, you know, rejected society, except for Billy Graham, who was friends of Richard Nixon, Colson, and the right-wing evangelical Christianity, is what they stuck with. So there was no new hippie Church of Gnosis that blossomed in the 1970s.
Nope, no.
Well, they all just became another form of conservative right-wing Christianity, too, only with longer sideburns, at least for a while. So I started to look further to the east, like others have done with Buddhism and Hinduism and Yogananda and so on. But for me, the path that I was very drawn to, that I discovered, is called Santmat, S-A-N-T-M-A-T, and it means the teachings of the saints. It's been translated as Path of the Masters. In fact, the first book that introduced me to this path is called Path of the Masters by Julian Johnson, which is online these days at the archive.org, the Internet Archive, the inventors of the Wayback Machine. the site where you can check websites out, screen captures of websites in years gone by. Archive.org has a nice library of texts. There is Path of the Masters, for anyone who wants to check it out. It's a bit brutal in the comparative religion section, but that doesn't really faze me all that much. But it was one of the first kind of textbook approaches to Saint-Mont, written by a Westerner who had studied theosophy and broke things down into chakras and subtle bodies and epoch yugas of time and heavenly regions and, cataloging all of these different teachings, the guts of mysticism. And so I became very drawn to Saint-Mont, and which has several branches that are known in the West. There are several teachers that travel to North America and Europe that are known here. But in India, there's a lot more. So I did with Saint-Mont what I did with Christianity. Started collecting all the scriptures from the past generations, asking questions, poking around, and researching it, pretty thoroughly. So that's how I ended up on the path I follow and represent today, and find it to be a very Gnostic path, actually. A lot of parallels with Gnosticism. In fact, I have written down some parallels here.
Sure. Tell us what they are.
Yeah. The parallels that I find, the mystical ingredients of the Nag Hammadi writings and other texts, Pista Sophia, include these 7 things. The first one, there are living teachers, living guides in each generation. Whether it's Paul or Thuda or Thudis, the teacher that taught Valentinus, and then his pupils, and so on, and so it goes. There's always a living teacher involved, and not just cuneiform tablets. As wonderful as Gilgamesh was, there's always a need for more, Each generation has its Gnostic Gospels and in its own words, a new style, new language kind of rephrases the same perennial philosophy over and over again. 2, a cosmology of several heavens or regions or planes that's present in the Nag Hammadi. You find that a lot. The heaven hopping, ascending through heaven number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Paul even mentions traveling out of body to the 3rd heaven in the Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, I believe. 3, understanding that souls can access these realms here and now during this present life. Heaven's not just for dead people. We can access these realms to some slight degree, even now, through a contemplative practice. We don't have to wait around for second comings and dates on the calendar and hypothesized future ages and, Planet X and so on. We don't have to have a calendar mysticism waiting for second comings in 1854, 1855.
Or the blood moon now, or anything.
Everything is a blood moon all of a sudden. Every moon that's a full moon is a blood moon all of a sudden here. So I'm with Thomas on that, to make fun of this idea of the kingdom of heaven dropping down from the sky. And yes, the birds will get there first. Let's see. And 5, visionary and auditory mysticism is present in all of these texts. First Enoch, Second Enoch, Gnostic Gospels, Book of Revelation, even in the New Testament, is kind of an out-of-body experience, though it does also have some subtle social commentary mixed in about the Roman Empire. But visions of heaven, radiant forms of Christ, materializing and teaching, saying, communicating to people, heavenly music, soul travel through these other realms. 6, an ethical code that has something to do with ahimsa, golden rule, including vegetarian diet. And the 7th point, of course, as everyone would say, reaching the ultimate reality, the nameless God, or nirvana, if you want to use that Eastern term. And those 7 things I find that Saint-Mont and the Gnostic Gospels have in common as a mystical approach to a spiritual path.
So why don't we get to one of them, or the main topic right now, and thread it through, and that is vegetarianism. As you know, and some of the listeners know, it's something that I sort of adopted, kind of in secret. I'm sort of out of the closet these days, and I had my reasons and so forth. But the truth is, and it's something that I have studied too and considered through my life and reading history and all that, but most people assume vegetarianism and veganism is something of the East, and that's where it came from. But isn't it true that even before Christianity, before Judaism here in the West, that was something that was being adopted by certain people?
Yes, it's very much a Western thing. In terms of history, I think it dates back to about the 6th century BCE with a group called of course there's Pythagoras and the Pythagoreans.
Right.
And there's a movement called Orphism, not to be confused with the Orphites, I guess, as far as I know, not to be confused with the Gnostic Orphites. There was a group called Orphism, the Orphics, plus Pythagoras and his band of Pythagoreans. They seem to be some of the first known vegetarians in the Western world, and they pretty much they almost date as far back as Hindus in the East, really 6th century, 5th century BC, pretty old, pretty ancient, and they taught vegetarianism as far as we know. There's a book called The Pythagorean Source Book and Library. Kenneth Guthrie is the editor of that, and that has most of the Pythagoras material in there, including another section of something called the Sentences of Sextus, which is a Nag Hammadi book. Part of it's in the Nag Hammadi, other parts are in other manuscripts. And I think someone even sells a complete Sentences of Sextus, putting all of these bits and pieces together. That's one of the texts, and there's some contradictory, as history is never a simple, clear-cut thing. So there are some passages which have, in the words of other writers who talk about Pythagoras in the ancient world, have him saying it's okay to eat certain kinds of meat but not others. But then there's a larger tradition that has Pythagoras being totally vegetarian. There's a lot of sources that say that, and that's kind of a consensus about Pythagoras, that he was a vegetarian. And there is this famous quote, our earth has abundance of such pure and harmless foods, and there is no need for us to partake of meals which blood has to be shed and innocent life sacrificed, unquote. That's kind of a famous quote attributed to Pythagoras, who is described as very strict, very ascetic, dressed in white, knew his past lives, talked about being around in previous lifetimes, believed in reincarnation, and I believe some think he was exposed to Indian philosophy somehow. There are some parallels between Pythagoras and Eastern religions, and also Platonism. If you look up Platonism at Wikipedia, there's a section dedicated to possible Upanishad influences in Platonism. So there may have been some slight contact. I wouldn't be surprised if the Library of Alexandria, for instance, had some Buddhist sutras in it, maybe a copy of the Gita or some Upanishads. I would not be surprised at all if there was some slight contact between East and West.
Oh yeah, there was definitely dialogue.
Yeah.
And James, for these ancient pagans or the Greeks who embraced vegetarianism, did they do it for the same reasons at the East? It had to do with reincarnation, detachment to the world, not wanting to, nonviolence and so forth?
Yeah, ahimsa, the same idea of not inflicting pain and suffering, living off cruelty. So they of course didn't use the word karma like they would in the East, but it was really the same motive, to live a peaceful, non-violent way of life, a more enlightened, peaceful life. That was the reason, the motive behind it. Pythagoreans taught that it was wrong to sacrifice animals in religious ceremonies, and so that was one of their big things. And later on that would figure into Essenism and early Christianity too. The so-called Hebrew Christians or Ebionites were very opposed, like their Essene grandparents were, to sacrifice in the Jewish temple for the very same reason. So not abusing animals, eating animals, or sacrificing animals was all very much part of Pythagorean or Neo-Pythagorean philosophy as it evolved.
And going to before we get to Christianity, let's talk a little bit about Judaism. Where do we find vegetarianism with the Jewish people?
Well, I think it's always been there. Most everyone that has aspired to return to Eden, some sort of mystic order, has wanted to go back to the diet of early Genesis, the Garden of Eden diet, which was vegetarian. So you get various Jewish groups and factions of Kabbalah, and I think in each generation have wanted to do that very same thing, go back to Eden and adopt that vegetarian diet and kind of reverse time and go from fall to ascension once again. The Essenes, it is said, were vegetarians. Josephus and Philo wrote about the Essenes, and a branch of the Essenes known as the Therapeutae. The Therapeutae were Essene Jews who had a monastery. In fact, that's the first time a Greek word for monastery was used, I think, was to refer to this group called the Therapeutae, that had some sort of community near a lake, reminding one of Qumran to a little extent. It was a community near a lake, in this case just outside of Alexandria in Egypt. And Philo of Alexandria describes the diet of these folks, saying that this form of Essenism practiced vegetarian diet. He describes them as vegetarians. And the table, too, is kept clear of animal flesh, nothing which has blood, but there is placed upon it bread for food and salt for seasoning, to which also hyssop is sometimes added, unquote. That's from Philo of Alexandria. So they seem to be very vegetarian, and many have characterized the Essene movement as very informed by Pythagorean wisdom. In fact, I think most all of these groups in the ancient world, Hermetic, Gnostic, Christian, Essene, were all very aware of Pythagoras and Plato, Platonism. I think that was sort of pervasive and probably influenced all of these groups to one degree or another.
It should be noted that, at the top of my head, when you think about Judaism, I believe the prophet Daniel was a vegetarian, and James, the brother of the Lord, was a vegetarian, right?
Yes. Moving into the Christian section, yes, James, the brother of Jesus, Robert Eisenman, when he wrote that gigantic 1,000-page book on James the Just.
Oh yeah, good.
On the back cover of this paperback edition of it, it begins with, James was a vegetarian. And that's how it actually starts, the first paragraph, the first sentence. According to, and I've really specialized in researching this. In fact, I have a whole array of quotes here on these folks. Well, I probably should start with John the Baptist.
Sure, yeah, give us the quotes. Give it to us.
Yeah, John the Baptist is described as a vegetarian according to the Gospel of the Ebionites, John 8, locust beans, not locusts. He was not a bug eater, but he ate locust beans, also known as carob beans, or cakes made from carob bean flour dipped in honey. And that's what the Gospel of the Ebionites has it. There is a Greek word, and I'm not fluent in Greek, I'm not up on Greek at all, but there's a Greek word which can either be translated as carob or locust. And wouldn't you know it, those New Testament Orthodox Gospels chose locusts, which I think cuts John the Baptist down a couple of notches and makes him, as a bug eater,
I want to show him like a caveman.
Caveman. Yeah, a really weird guy. It cuts him down a few notches. But it was supposed to be locust beans that he ate. And it's fairly common knowledge. In the Middle East, there's a tree called St. John's tree, which is a locust bean tree. And so it's not a total secret. And it was recorded in the Gospel of the Ebionites that was his real diet, not bugs or locusts. And then, of course, in the Ebionite tradition that is allied with James the Just, and I really do think of the Gospel of Thomas as being in earlier form, some kind of earlier form. Thomas was allied with James the Just, saying 12 heads. The disciples ask, who are we going to follow after you leave us? And Jesus, or Yeshua, says, James the Just, for whose sake heaven and earth came into being. So, like Robert Eisenman documents so well in his book on James the Just, James gets to be the successor of Jesus, one of supposedly 18 bishops of Jerusalem, or part of this Jewish Christian, Hebrew Christian group, this original Jesus movement. And he is described very much as a vegetarian. And I'm trying to find my vegetarian passages. It's on this tab. I've written a couple of articles with all of these passages which describe the diet. Jesus is quoted as saying, I have not come to eat the Passover lamb with you. The story of the fishes and loaves, in the earliest versions, there's no fishes. Irenaeus doesn't talk about fishes. The reference to fish seems to come a little bit later. People seem to feel that there wasn't a miracle of loaves and fishes, that came along later. There's a passage of Jesus, Luke 21:34, using it's called the Old Syriac Aramaic manuscript, an early Syriac Aramaic copy taken from some 2nd century Greek manuscript, supposedly. Someone translated it into Syriac Aramaic. That sounds very old. And it goes, be on your guard, so that your hearts do not become heavy with the eating of flesh, and with the intoxication of wine, and with the anxiety of the world. And that day come upon you suddenly, for as a snare it will come upon all those who dwell upon the surface of the earth. That's Luke 21:34 in this old Syriac Aramaic manuscript, which sounds very vegetarian for Jesus. And also the theme of intoxication you find in Thomas.
Right, yeah.
You know, the whole thing about being asleep, taking the blue pill, being hypnotized by the world, forgetting who you are. I'm trying to find my collection of passages here. Here we go. Here they are. James the Just was vegetarian. Peter, from the Clementine homilies, which is in the Ebionite vegetarian tradition, paying homage to James the Just as the true successor. Anti-Paul. Peter said, I live on olives and bread, to which I rarely only add vegetables, unquote. That's in the Clementine homilies. And happiness is found in the practice of virtue. Accordingly, the Apostle Matthew partook of seeds and nuts, hard-shelled fruits and vegetables without flesh, unquote. That's from Clement of Alexandria, the instructor, Book 2, Chapter 1. John never ate meat. Now, I don't know which John, but it's all rather interesting all the same. John never ate meat, and that's according to Eusebius, the History of the Church. James, the brother of the Lord, lived on seeds and plants and touched neither meat nor wine. That's from some very Latin-sounding epistle, ad Faustum 22, verse 3, whatever that might be. Eusebius, book 2, chapter 23, James, the brother of the Lord, was holy from his mother's womb, and he drank no wine nor strong drink, nor did he eat flesh, unquote. So yeah, you have these references to James being vegetarian right from the womb, and he gets to be the successor, according to Gospel of Thomas, saying 12. He gets to be the lead apostle or head of this group. And others have raised this point before, which I think is a good one. Why would the Jesus family raise one brother vegetarian, but the other one not? On what planet does that happen? Right?
Very true.
So I would assume that the whole family, depending on your views about the existence of a historic Jesus or not, but the whole family, one can assume, would be following the same ethical principles. And if James was vegetarian, why not Jesus? Why not the parents? Maybe other brothers and sisters too?
Maybe.
Yeah, and so there are all of these passages, and these are all in ancient texts, not channeled writings or forgeries from the 19th century, but ancient writings found, some of them are in the Ante-Nicene Fathers, that 12-volume set of all these old writings of church fathers. In there is the Clementine literature, the Clement writings, and those are very anti-Paul, very pro-vegetarian. And I guess some of that material, the core of it, may date back to the 2nd century. It certainly very much represents the point of view of the Hebrew Christians, the Ebionites, that thought they were the ones, that James was the successor of Jesus, and they are the faithful keepers of this original Christianity before Paul, if you want to give it a name. That we're very vegetarian.
But even then, isn't there an argument to be made that Paul himself might have been a vegetarian? I think in one passage, he's arguing with James and Peter and mocking people eating vegetables, but I think in Romans, he's talking about the eating meat is no good for you.
Maybe. It's possible. He does seem to be their opponent and seems to argue with them about diet, at least for his followers. But yeah, that's an interesting point, because he himself advocated being celibate, but he did not impose that on his followers. So maybe he was personally vegetarian, but was trying to recruit Romans, or the Gentiles, quote unquote, to Christianity, and did not impose vegetarianism on them. That's another take on it, one could say. But yeah, his letters certainly are another early witness to both James the Just as being the real leader of this original group, and he followed that same principle of Thomas, verse 12, saying 12, as he himself went to hang out with James and seeking his blessing on a couple of occasions. And he talks about the vegetarianism of the original group, but says it's okay to eat meat that's sacrificed to idols, whereas the Ebionite point of view is no. And the author of the book of Revelation also takes that same point of view, that it's not a good idea to eat meat sacrificed to idols. And so, thus that old Pythagorean idea of don't sacrifice animals, use them in any sort of animal sacrifice ritual. And like the Essenes, who were opposed to animal sacrifice in the temple, you find those folks espousing that same point of view, that it's not good to eat meat sacrificed to idols or sacrifice it in the first place.
And that, of course, beyond the Bible and the text, don't we know that many of the church fathers were vegetarians, right?
They were. They seem to have, back in the earliest days, like Tertullian quoted the book of Enoch as scripture, they had their own pathways that seem a little less orthodox to us, surprisingly unorthodox to us now. That St. Pachomius might have had a library with the Nag Hammadi in it also seems kind of unorthodox from our modern day perspective and knowledge of Orthodox Christianity. And certainly, I believe some of those, Hieronymus, I think, is one early church father that basically saw Jesus as coming to free us from many things, including meat, the meat diet. That was very much part of some people's path in early Christianity, as if they were getting their knowledge from other sources besides Paul. Of course, Clement of Alexandria, I believe he was vegetarian. Origen of Alexandria quotes the Gospel of the Hebrews. So he had a copy of that in his day. So knowledge of the vegetarianism of the early Christians, I'm sure, was known. And some seem to have followed that diet, and it was important to them. Kind of in spite of Paul saying it doesn't matter. It did matter to some, even if it didn't matter to Paul, as far as his views on diet for the Roman Empire.
Well, maybe Paul was starting his own perfect here kind of dichotomy that later became popular with the Gnostics. When you're ready, but until then, figure it out.
That very well could be. That kind of ethic does turn up in quite a few different religions. I want to share this passage. It's found in the Recognitions of Clement, which is one of the parts of the Clementine literature. This is one of the coolest quotes I know in any apocryphal writing in the ancient world, because it's the example of Ebionite Christianity seeing truth in another religion. I mean, we're so used to religions bickering and fighting and hating each other, hating on each other. I just find this to be a neat quote. There are likewise amongst the Bactrians in the Indian countries immense multitudes of Brahmins, who also themselves, from their tradition, the tradition of their ancestors, peaceful customs and laws, neither commit murder nor adultery nor worship idols, nor have the practice of eating animal food. They're never drunk, never do anything maliciously, but always revere God. And that's a quote from Recognitions of Clement. I just find that so surprising. This knowledge. They know about India. They know about religions of India. They find some faction in India that they think is really cool and just like them, sharing the same values, including vegetarianism. And that's in that Ebionite Clementine literature, which I really like a lot.
Why don't we get to the Gnostics? And I think we both know the answers to this, but why don't we just let the listeners that might not know? How did the Gnostics feel about eating meat?
They seem to be very much in the Pythagorean camp, that's for sure. In the Nag Hammadi library itself, there is something called the Prayer of Thanksgiving. And most every Thanksgiving, although the two are not related other than the name, I like posting it in social media, Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, and so on, to lend support to the tofurkey eating veg population during the Thanksgiving holiday. So I post this prayer of Thanksgiving. It comes from the Nag Hammadi library, and the same prayer also turns up in the Corpus Hermeticum. And it describes this prayer, and then at the end of the prayer it says, when they had said these things in the prayer, they embraced each other, and they went to eat their holy food, which has no blood in it. That's the last verse of this prayer of Thanksgiving in the Nag Hammadi. And in the Corpus Hermeticum, the different versions, Marvin Meyer has a footnote that says vegetarian food. Sir Walter Scott's translation of Hermetica says a vegetarian meal, and it goes, having prayed thus, let us betake ourselves to a meal unpolluted by flesh of living things, unquote. And the G.R.S. Mead translation of Hermetica renders it this way, with this desire we now betake us to our pure and fleshless meal, unquote. So that is just a very veg section of the Nag Hammadi.
Indeed.
And Corpus Hermeticum, yeah. Hermes, too, Hermetic as well. It's kind of a shared book between the two. I guess you could say that Hermetic philosophy, the Hermetic, as in Hermes Trismegistus, was very closely related to Gnosticism. Somehow or another, there's a close relationship between the two, the various forms of Gnosticism and Hermetic philosophy.
And it should be mentioned by then, when the Gnostics were appearing at the universities and the communities, that and sort of joining in with the Neoplatonists, and their scriptures started becoming again more Platonic, that Plotinus and Porphyry and all the other 3rd, 4th century Neoplatonists, they were vegetarian too. So there was this stream that the philosopher and the mystic took of just abstaining from meat.
It does seem to be very pervasive, and I liken it to the Linux operating system for a nice computer analogy. Either Pythagoreanism or Platonism is sort of like the basic, like Linux is, and then you've got different versions of Linux that come along, Ubuntu and Linux Mint, Fedora, Red Hat, all of these versions. And so I do think of all of these groups as kind of like that, the Ubuntus and Fedoras of their time, different versions, of the same kind of Neoplatonist Pythagorean way of life. Only you just pop in the name of your particular redeemer. Okay, Hermes, Jesus, Seth, fill in the blank. But other than the name of the school of thought, they all seem to share a lot of ideas in common about what the universe is like, the nature of evil, and being vegetarian is part of it, some sort of contemplative practice. They share a lot in common, and I suppose that's why the monks of Nag Hammadi could read Sethian books, Valentinian books, sentences of Sextus the Pythagorean, and be very happy with all of these different, we think of them as different schools of Gnosticism or schools of Christianity or pagan Gnosis, but they had so much in common that the collectors of the Nag Hammadi, the people of Nag Hammadi, were happy to collect all of these writings and saw them all as sacred, apparently.
Yeah, it was, again, it was a stream, a powerful stream that sort of got suppressed. And then moving ahead, of course, it's, we could say it's a no-brainer that we have the Manichaeans and later on Cathars and other groups who were completely, abstain from meat, or at least in the inner circle wouldn't eat meat.
Yeah, the inner circle of the Manichaean religion was purely veg, and they had some interesting ideas about liberating light from plants during an age that's pre-scientific, so they didn't really know about photosynthesis. They didn't use that term so much, but they were veg. Mani, the prophet Mani, grew up in an Elkosite, if I'm pronouncing that. I don't think I've ever heard anybody give a talk on. I don't think I've ever heard the name pronounced, but Elkosite, I believe, is.
That's how I say it. So
that's how you say it.
We'll be both wrong, no problem.
We may both be wrong, but it seems to have been a kind of splinter group of Ebionite Christianity, vegetarian, very Jewish, Hebrew, still celebrating. I don't know if they were Sabbath keepers too, maybe. They're very much in that school of Hebrew Christianity. James the Just was our guy, being vegetarian. So that was Mani's family. His parents were part of the Elkosites, and so he eventually founds this Manichaean religion, which almost became a world religion from France, no matter what some people say. France, Eastern Europe, right through to India, and I think there may still even be a few Manichaeans in India, the home of the refugees of most all world religion. Eastern China, along the Silk Road. I've read some Manichaean texts that talk about praise Jesus, praise Manny, praise the Buddha.
Right, yeah.
All very, very intriguing. So the Manichaeans, the inner circle was certainly vegetarian and more ascetic, but they had an outer circle. And maybe Paul had that, Gnostic Paul at least, may have had that same formula of an inner circle and an outer circle. That's kind of common in some forms of Hinduism too. You have sadhus or sannyasins who are stricter lifestyle, and then a wider population of householders or married people, not following as strict a lifestyle. So yes, the Manichaeans. And then there is a group that's come to light in recent decades called the Dakin group. That's Chinese for Church of the Light. And it was this group in eastern China. There's a book out called the Jesus Sutras by, what's his name? His last name is Palmer. Yeah, it's called the Jesus Sutras. And it's about this group that seems very much Manichaean in a very Taoist, Buddhist sort of way. in China, the Church of the Light, they were vegetarians. And for them, the reasoning was pretty basic. One of the 10 Commandments is don't kill. And so they thought, all right, well, I guess that makes us vegetarian then. They really didn't need, too many references to other sources. They just read the 10 Commandments and from that concluded that vegetarianism is central. And they are either related to the Manichaeans or the Nestorians, or maybe they represent a fusion of all of those Syriac Church of the East traditions, Manichaean, Nestorian, and Orthodox Syriac, hard to say, but it morphed into this very Buddhist, Taoist sounding group with some beautiful texts. Instead of Westerners sending missionaries to China to convert them to Orthodox Christianity, it should have been the other way around. I think we'd be better off to have these Church of the Light folks around.
Agreed.
Making followers in the West, and we get this very Buddhist-type Christianity. Very beautiful texts. It's a book called the Jesus Sutras that have translated some of their 8th century, around that period of time, 7th or 8th century AD writings. They were vegetarians. In fact, most of what you could call the light mystics of the ages, including even some Sufi groups, have traditionally been vegetarian. Mystical, visionary, any spiritual path that has a visionary component seems to have been vegetarian. And I think of the Nag Hammadi text as very otherworldly. People sitting in that cave near where Nag Hammadi was found, in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the desert, in this lunar landscape environment, meditating or just having a very otherworldly, contemplative kind of life. I can see them getting into altered states, doing some kind of meditation practice, very much a visionary kind of tradition of seeing visions of angels in heavens and hearing heavenly music. Yeah, these folks have generally been vegetarian quite consistently, east and west, from India to Greece.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense when you really look at it, but I guess it's different with everybody. So moving a little bit further, and I like to ask this to many of my guests. When somebody asks you, James, what is Gnosis, what do you usually tell them, especially if it's somebody that might not be familiar with it or somebody that's completely abused it, like a lot of occultists do?
Yeah, the word Gnostic is one of the most abused words in language. No definition, fill in the blank. And I was talking to Stefan Huller, and I like his definition of a kind of classic Gnosis, Nag Hammadi based, ancient definition of gnosis. It is really a personal acquaintance, to use Bentley Layton's definition, acquaintance, a personal acquaintance or personal encounter with the divine, heavenly realms in one's experience. One may begin with faith or knowledge, as in intellectual knowledge or theory, but then there has to come a time for experience. And for the Gnostic type soul, the mystic, I use those terms interchangeably, mystic, Gnostic, there is this desire for entering into some kind of experience with the divine. A lot of those near-death experience books are very fascinating. People who meditate, I think, can get some of the way there, too, through less traumatic means, and have, or at least catch a glimpse of heavenly realms during this life. So I think of Gnosis as being that mystical experience of something beyond body consciousness that is entering into that timeless realm, beyond the material world of existence, beyond the material plane.
I think that's a very good definition, James. And what would you say, do you feel that, what is the legacy the Gnostics have left on our modern times? And do you feel their philosophy or their movement is having an effect or is somewhere around these modern days?
Yeah, it is starting, I think, to permeate into the culture as individuals trust less in institutions, which is sort of a pejorative term now, I think. I think that the Gnostic Gospels are more people now know about them than at any time in history. And so now would be, I think, I know some have argued against the usage of the word Gnostic, but I think that would be a terrible mistake. Now that terms like Gnostic and Gnostic Gospels are catching on, and I mean the host of the nightly show on Comedy Central, Larry Wilmore, used the word Gnostic twice last week.
Really? Wow. I missed that.
And so, I mean, for it to come up on late night comedy television, now is not the time to throw out the word Gnostic.
Good point.
Some have seen a problem that using a monolithic term that may apply to different groups, can be counterproductive. Like the Gospel of Thomas probably started off as something that wasn't Gnostic at all, just Gnostics liked it a lot, just like Gnostics liked the Gospel of John.
Right.
So you may not technically call Thomas a Gnostic Gospel or the Gospel of John, in the same sense of being demiurgical with a complex system. But changing the word to something else, getting rid of the word Gnostic, doesn't really solve any problem. It just makes it another 75-year climb until that word becomes popular and turns up on late night talk shows. So I like the word Gnostic, and if people think that it's a misleading term, like Buddhism, for instance, an all-encompassing term, the only solution is just for people to study a little bit. If you study Buddhism, you learn about Zen, Theravadan, Mahayana, Tibetan Buddhism. So you immediately pick up on that there are different Buddhist sects. You don't assume that there's just one group called Buddhism. And the same is true with Gnostic. You realize there are Christian Gnostics, Jewish Gnostics, pagan Gnostics, other groups that we simply don't even know much about at this point, and they're just kind of mystery Gnostics. So people, if they study a little bit, they will get that. They will hear about the demiurge and realize that the many forms of Gnosticism are demiurgical, have a belief in a demiurge. So they'll get that. I don't see the word Gnostic as being a problem or that it will necessarily throw people off in some way. If you study a subject, you get acquainted with it, and you realize there are different groups, Valentinians and Sethians, and even Orthodoxy use the term Gnostic and Gnosis to some degree, in a Trinitarian sort of way, in a more Orthodox sort of way. They had their Gnosis as well, on Mount Athos, for instance, in Greece.
Before we go, James, would you like to give the listeners some of the links so they can follow your work and check out some of your scholarship and claims just in case?
Yeah, a simple way to do it, I'll give out my website and my email address, and if they want to drink from my fire hose of I've got a lot of books online, ebooks, Sant-Mott books, links to all of these texts online at Scribd, at archive.org, and at other sites. So if they want to send me an email and say, send me some links to some Gnostic books or Sant-Mott books, I'm happy to do that. My web address is spiritualawakeningradio.com, or they could just send me an email, james@spiritualawakeningradio.com, and I'll send links. There are all of these wonderful writings that you can read for free. Of course, Gnosis.org is a wonderful resource, and there's so many wonderful sites that have put online even relatively obscure texts that people haven't really heard of before. Lesser known Gnostic texts like the Book of the Resurrection of Jesus Christ by Bartholomew the Apostle. That one doesn't get much PR. No,
not at all.
No Smithsonian Channel, no History Channel, no National Geographic's channel special about that at all. Just was discovered before the modern age of cable and satellite TV, and has kind of slipped through the cracks, kind of like the Mandaean scriptures.
Right.
So they're very wonderful. The Nag Hammadi is the prose of the Gnostics, but the Mandaean and Manichaean scriptures are the poetry.
Very true, very true. Well, I think that's all the time we have today, James. I'd like to thank you very much for coming on Aeon Byte and giving us a very educational and intriguing discussion.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm a real fan of your show, and I listen to most every episode.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, certainly listen to this one if you can handle it.
I'll see if the guest is any good.
Yeah, exactly. All right, thanks, James.
Bye-bye.
Spontaneous, more ultraviolet than any mythology, like the shadows before Babylon. The original, undifferentiated oneness of being still radiates serene as the black pennants of assassins, random, perpetually intoxicated. Chaos comes before all principles of order and entropy. It's neither a god nor a maggot. Its idiotic desires encompass and define every possible choreography. All meaningless ethers and phlegestons, its masks, are crystallizations of its own facelessness, like clouds. Everything in nature is perfectly real, including consciousness. There's absolutely nothing to worry about. Not only have the chains of the law been broken, they never existed. Demons never guarded the stars. The Empire never got started. Eros never grew a beard. No. Listen, what happened was this. They lied to you. Sold you ideas of good and evil. Gave you distrust of your body. Shame for your prophethood of chaos. Invented words of disgust for your molecular love. Mesmerized you with inattention. Bored you with civilization and all its usurious emotions. There is There's no becoming, no revolution, no struggle, no path. You're already the monarch of your own skin. Your inviolable freedom waits to be completed only by the love of another monarch. A politics of dream, urgent as the blueness of sky. To shed all the illusory rights and hesitations of history demands the economy of some legendary Stone Age. Shamans, not priests, bards, not lords, hunters, not police, gatherers of Paleolithic laziness. Agents of chaos cast burning glances at anything or anyone capable of bearing witness to their condition. Their fever of lux elvaputus. I am awake. I am awake. Avatars of chaos act as spies, saboteurs, criminals of Amarfo. Neither selfless nor selfish, accessible as children, mannered as barbarians, shaped with obsessions, unemployed, essentially deranged, wolf angels, mirrors for contemplation, eyes like flowers, pirates of all signs and meanings. Here we are, crawling the cracks between the walls of church and state, school, factory, all the paranoid monoliths cut off from the tribe by feral nostalgia. We tunnel after lost words, imaginary bombs. The last possible deed is that which defines perception itself, an invisible cord that connects us. Illegal dancing in the courthouse corridors. If I were to kiss you here, they'd call it an act of terrorism. So let's take our pistols to bed and wake up the city at midnight, like drunken bandits celebrating the fusillade, the message